clicked on the general link. So I've started that, and then we can look at, so I'll move Charles over to attendee role. And now we've got folks coming in. Okay, so. Welcome, folks. We're getting ready for the last session of today, which will be our afternoon plenary on the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. Really excited for this session. We will get started at 3:40. We're just waiting on a few more panelists to join in. I hope you all have enjoyed this final day of the 7th annual University of Maryland Environmental Justice Symposium. Stick around after this panel, or I might do an announcement before we get started, in case people feel like they want to dip out, because there is a survey, feedback survey that we would really love for you all to respond to and let us know how you found, how you enjoyed, what you liked, what you didn't like, for this year's conference. So stick around for that. But this session will kick off at 3:40. Welcome, everyone. This is the final plenary session of the day. We will get started. We're looking to get started here at 3:40. Just letting you know you're in the right place. Greetings all. We are just waiting on a couple more panelists. In the meantime, I hope you have all enjoyed this final day of presentations. I will be dropping a conference feedback survey in the chat for everyone to click over to. You'll also get an email notification, but if you want to be ahead of the game, click it in the chat. Please fill that out for us. Let us know what you liked about this year, what you didn't like about this year. And we're looking to get started shortly. We've got Angelo coming over to the panelist side of things. Just waiting on Mr. Foster. All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get things rolling here.
Okay, everybody. Like to welcome you to our closing session. Really excited for this closing session. It's been a great symposium. I think this is a great way to close out. So again, I'm Dr. Sacoby Wilson. I'm director of the Center for Community Engagement, Environmental Justice, and Health. In our closing session today, it's entitled "A New Page: WHEJAC and President Biden's Executive Order on Climate Change." Our speakers today are including Peggy Shephard, and sorry, Peggy, we misspelled your last name. Sorry about that. We'll fix that. Co-founder, executive director of WeACT for Environmental Justice. Ruth Santiago, board member for Earthjustice. Angelo Logan, campaign director, Moving Forward Network, and Jerome Foster, who I believe will be joining us, executive director and founder, 1 Million of Us. On January 27, 2021, exactly 1 week after his inauguration, President Biden signed Executive Order 14008, tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. The order emphasized the need for national security and foreign policy strategies that take aggressive climate action. It establishes the first time the White House Environmental Justice Council. This is the first ever advisory council, WHEJAC, dedicated to addressing current and historic environmental justices at the CEQ level. The administration has allocated funding towards addressing environmental justice more than probably any other administration in the history of administrations. And on May 21st, the WHEJAC submitted its first report on recommendations for EJ policy. So during this session, we're going to have WHEJAC members talk about, being on the council, their role, talk about the report, talk about the expectations for the Biden administration, and just speak to what's the potential impact of WHEJAC and this administration on addressing, climate injustice, environmental justice, and other issues that are relevant to our frontline and fence line communities. So to get started, I want to get started with some brief introductions. Can you tell us about, who you are, your organization, your work, and speak to this administration's whole of government approach to environmental justice? And let's start with Peggy.
So good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I am co-founder and executive director of WeACT for Environmental Justice. We're based in Harlem with a federal policy office in Washington, D.C. We got started about 33 years ago, just a couple of years before the first National People of Color Summit. And we work on a full range of environmental issues and concerns from an equity and justice point of view, and focus on organizing the most affected community residents as our members to work on these issues through community working groups and to engage them in environmental decision making. It has been a great opportunity to be a part of the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. It's the first time I've been on an advisory board that's completely environmental justice advocates. We were on the WHEJAC, the advisory group to the EPA for so many years, but that's a stakeholder group where environmental justice folks were always a minority. And we always had to try to come to consensus with industry and business and government and academia. So this is really different. This is made up of about 26 incredible colleagues who have lived experience, who have accountability to constituents, and who have been thought leaders on these issues for so many years in their regions. So it is a pleasure to be part of that and to be part of that opportunity with an administration that says we're going to take a whole of government approach. Now, the WHEJAC has made over 100 pages of recommendations for the administration's first 100 days on Justice 40, on screening tools, on the executive order, how that needs to be refined. But now the real job is, how do these things get implemented, and how do we hold the government accountable to advancing environmental justice? And there is a group on the WHEJAC that is very comfortable with holding government accountable, has experience in doing so, and we are working to do just that. And this moment, just as we have the opportunity for a whole of government approach, just as there seems to be a mandate for that, we know that everything is about implementation. Everything is about community consultation. And that's what we are prepared to try to hold the government accountable for and to ensure. So thank you, Sacoby, for developing this panel today as the closing words and thoughts for your incredible conference over the last few days.
Oh, thank you for those kind words, Peggy. You know, I think it's important because this moment is very important, and WHEJAC's work, I think, is part of is going to push us to the next, so the evolution of environmental justice in this country. So that's why I wanted y'all to speak to the great work that y'all are doing and the impact that y'all are having. So let me move to Ruth next.
Hey, hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this panel on environmental justice. I'm honored, and it's a pleasure to serve with the founders and the legends of environmental justice that I had read about and heard about, but hadn't had the opportunity to meet until I joined the WHEJAC, or some of them. So yeah, this is some work we have been doing for a long time in Puerto Rico. So I wanted to clarify that I do work with community and environmental groups in Puerto Rico, especially groups that are heavily impacted by power plant generation in PR, which is the source of the largest amounts of emissions and contamination in the archipelago. Puerto Rico is a group of islands. So, and we really feel like we're on the map with this, which was not the case many times with Puerto Rico. So some of you may know that the plants, the fossil-fired power plants in Puerto Rico are very problematic, not in compliance with a lot of regulations. I think we hold the record for no action assurances in terms of enforcement. We have not seen the kind of enforcement necessary. We have, plants that are non-in-attainment, and they're impacting the especially Afro-descendant communities in southern Puerto Rico, southeastern Puerto Rico, and here in Salinas and neighboring Guayama, and also in southwestern Puerto Rico. There are the two big plants. There's also one in San Juan that's very problematic. So that's the work I've been doing for over 30 years. In a way, I feel like my trajectory, my personal history is very linked to those power plants. I can explain that later. But yeah, I just wanted to say hello and thank you for the invitation.
You're welcome. Thank you for being here. And thank you for all who are here with their family as well. This EJ is about family, so thank you for being here. Let's go to Angelo, please.
Hello, everyone. First of all, I just wanted to say what an honor it is to be on the panel with such amazing folks and to serve on WHEJAC with so many amazing folks. And thank you for inviting me to this amazing panel and symposium. So I'm Angelo Logan. I'm with the Moving Forward Network, which is a nationwide network of 55 plus organizations led by frontline community organizations. We coalesced in 2010 around issues related to freight transportation. So that's seaports and inland ports and everything in between. Trying to address the detrimental effects of diesel pollution and other environmental justice issues that arise from that. My personal story is, I grew up in East Los Angeles and right next to a rail yard. And as a result of a cancer cluster in my neighborhood 22 years ago, me and a number of neighbors got together to organize our community. And as a result of the organizing, between local community, neighborhood organizing, we found ourselves really trying to navigate the systems that have a role to play in the ills that were affecting our communities, the assaults on our communities. And that led us from local land use decisions, local authorities, all the way to state, to regional, and federal. So it was natural that some of the work that I was involved in and engaged in really started to level up to federal level work, but not leaving out that local work, because at the end of the day, nothing happens without community organizing. And so that kind of brings us to this notion around whole of government's approach. And that's really an important approach. And we hope that we realize that the administration takes that very seriously when we're talking about environmental justice. You have to have all the different hands talking to each other to address issues using freight transportation as an example. You can't have EPA enforce or implement regulations to reduce or eliminate diesel pollution from trucks and trains if DOT is just allowing for unbridled growth of ports or of freeways or of rail yards. So the different departments and agencies need to be able to talk to each other. And I would even go to the length to say that the federal government agencies, departments need to start talking and working in collaboration with state and local governments as well. It's an honor to be on WHEJAC, and collectively, the leadership and knowledge that WHEJAC brings forth, I think it's going to bring amazing things. And as you said, Sacoby, that this is a new plateau and will bring environmental justice to a new level. Thanks again for inviting me on this panel.
Well, thank you. Unless Jerome has joined us. Jerome, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your organization, and the work that you're doing, and your thoughts about the whole of government approach to environmental justice? Go ahead.
Absolutely. Sorry for the technical difficulties in the back end, but it's great to be here with you guys. Yeah, my name is Jerome Foster II. I'm executive director of 1 Million of Us, which is a work to really center taking it to the street and taking it to the polls, as we say, of like organizing in our local communities and then making sure government is actually making substantive legislative action. So that's the background that I come from, and being a part of the WHEJAC and the approach of whole of government action is really crucial as we transform into this renewable energy future, and that we not only just focus on technology, but also reconcile with the past and reconcile with the fact that climate has continued to erode the systems of infrastructure, of communities that have already been marginalized, and of past socioeconomic issues that have not been ratified and continue to be exacerbated by the climate crisis. So it's incredibly important that as we talk about climate change, and as we talk about how climate justice can stop the climate crisis, it comes from making sure that every part of government is actively enforcing new policies and making sure that communities that are being impacted first and worst are first in line to receive those remedies and receive those investments. So that's why it's crucially important that this WHEJAC is here, and not only just to have this body that's advising, but actually seeing our words and our recommendations be put into place. So it's incredibly grateful to be a part of this and be a part of this conversation.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. I want to move to the next question. I'm going to kind of rework it a little bit because it's a little long. So President Biden has made some policy initiatives, including overhauling the Department of Justice, adding a new division, reestablishing the Interagency Council, which used to be known as the Interagency Working Group on Environmental Justice, that was connected more to Office of Environmental Justice to the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council, part of that whole conglomerate, right? And then also overhauling the EPA's External Civil Rights Compliance Office, which many communities have been complaining about for years of not finding any racial discrimination in differential permitting the siting of hazards. So the question is, based on the work that President Biden is doing on the executive order on climate change, would you consider President Biden the first climate justice president? Do you think that these initiatives, are they enough to really address the differential climate impact of the communities that we work in, that we serve, that we come from? Is it enough to help our communities when it comes to climate change? And let's go with Angelo first.
Thank you. So I wouldn't go as far to say that President Biden is the climate justice president. I think that he has done far more than any other president that I know of and the administration. But I think, one of the important things to realize, I think one of the most important things that he did was to surround himself with really great people. So we got some really great people in the administration that are really helping to push and move an environmental justice agenda. This isn't as a result of Biden's ability to understand environmental justice truly and enable different policies within his administration, but it's decades of organizing that has gotten the attention of the administration and people around him to understand that this is critically important, not just for the environment, not just for the economy, but for people, real life people every day, and the most vulnerable people in communities. And so with that, I think that it takes millions of different types of programs and policies and packets from the administration all the way down to the neighborhood level to really get us to a point where we're going to see real environmental justice, or at least to the point where we're going to see our communities thriving, not just surviving, and hopefully even getting to a point beyond, the survival mode, right? What that's going to take is for our folks in the administration, we got friends and allies that are hopefully going to be continuously pushing the environmental justice agenda, giving our communities the ability to organize venues, to organize our communities and to continue to push and to elevate the issue so that not just the administration, but all levels of government understand the importance of environmental justice and implement rules, policies, laws, regulations, and the like to get us where we need to be.
Thank you for that, Angelo. Let's go to Ruth next. What are your thoughts about Biden in his work around climate change and these policies and the impact in this fight for justice?
Right. So definitely the steps taken, the creation of the WHEJAC and the other provisions in the the executive order 14008 to tackle the climate crisis and other policy pronouncements by the Biden-Harris administration are very promising. And I think we were all pleasantly surprised to see some of the, as Angelo mentioned, some of the nominations and people at the cabinet level and otherwise at the White House that have been named. And so that's all very positive, very promising. But I think when we issued our recommendations back in May, we took sort of an additional step, this was something I think that had the consensus of the group to follow these recommendations through implementation, right? So that will be the key factor, how much of what we're recommending, and it's such great work in those recommendations. I mean, it just brought together, as someone mentioned, years and years, decades of experience organizing, doing community work, demanding environmental justice for our communities that are overburdened by different kinds of pollution, underserved in so many ways, that basically lack access to clean air, clean water, the very fundamental things of life. So we totally, I think, all agree that we want to see the implementation of this before handing out any medals or anything. So I think you'll see that we are very hopeful, and we think there are good steps that have been taken, and want to see that through. There's one particular situation that comes to mind, the issue about clean energy versus renewable energy and energy efficiency and other things. We want that to be much more precise. You saw the work group that listed the priorities or the principles that identify an environmental justice community, talked very clearly about accepting some options, but not necessarily all of the options that we're seeing that have to do with so-called clean energy, like the so-called natural gas, methane gas, and carbon capture and all of these things. So I think we're going to be working to make those recommendations a reality.
Thank you for that. Yeah, your statement about implementation is a common thing that came out of WHEJAC. So the first FACO on environmental justice, the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council, we've been having some meetings. We just had meetings earlier this week. And one of the things that came up was, you said implementation, they said from problem to solution. Like the proof is in the solutions. We've been doing this work for years, right, Peggy? Peggy was on WHEJAC. All these reports. WHEJAC has 30 years of reports. Where's the solutions at? Right. So I appreciate that comment. I also appreciate your last comment about you talk about a gas infrastructure. How are we going to talk about we transitioning to clean energy and then we're going to expand gas infrastructure? That dog don't hunt. So I'm going to pass the mic to Jerome. Go ahead, Jerome. What do you think?
Yeah, thinking about what you said about have Biden being a climate justice president, that is way too early and not at all. Shouldn't be handing out any medals, as we said. It's saying that in order for President Biden to be a climate president, he must also not just talk about climate justice, but also talk about other forms of justice because they're intersectional with the climate movement. Like when we talk about Southern immigration, they talk about the root issues, but they don't talk about the fact that many of the reasons about why they're traveling to America is because of drought and because of increased persistence of hurricanes in their communities. And that's causing so much of this immigration as well. And when we talk about climate justice, him being a climate justice president, what we need is for him to also talk about the fact that Kern County, California, communities all throughout that community don't have any access to clean water. Like that would actually change major things. Like this is really great having these conversations and having these great words, but those empty promises mean nothing unless we're actually hearing the sound of pen to paper. Like that's what Ruth is saying, is like problem to solution. And in order for us to actually think about what would necessitate a comprehensive climate president, it would mean not just talking about, but meeting the moment. It would be actually saying this is the timeline. And if we're going to get to 50% reductions by 2030, we have to see year over year commitments being seen and implemented. Like how we need to end the implementation of fossil fuel investments, and how we have to make sure that the Line 3 pipeline and the Byhalia pipeline don't take a massive movement of communities to stop. It should be the president that's championing this and not continuing to back it up and saying, oh, we're going to postpone this to 2022, where we have a review, and then maybe after that, we'll think about stopping it. No, we voted for a climate president through his promises and through his campaign speeches. So that's the word looking for right now. This council can be great and through the works that we do, but we need Biden to back it up. So that's really what we're looking for when we talk about Biden becoming a climate president. Because right now it's just the same old thing of great, pretty words, but empty promises.
You're hearing from the now leadership, y'all. We need to see some things backed up, not these empty words and empty promises. You said it. I like what you're saying. Let's go to Peggy. Follow it up, Peggy. I know you follow it up. Go ahead, Peggy.
Well, the only thing I can say here is that we're at this moment because of so many people and because of a process of evolution. From the first Republican who created the Office of Environmental Justice at EPA, from Bill Clinton, who created the first EJ executive order, and then Obama, clarified that. And then Black Lives Matter really putting the focus on the racial injustice that has been happening in this country that is so systemic that people now begin to understand that, yes, that is what environmental racism is. That's what we've been talking about for decades. But that word environment has kind of put people off, not understanding that we're talking about another form of social justice here. And so, again, the proof is in the pudding. We've got perhaps a way that the administration has begun to set up an infrastructure. Infrastructure is key. If this kind of investment in frontline communities is to be sustained. And now we've got to have that scorecard. And that's what WHEJAC is beginning to work on now. Two of our key working groups will be implementation of Justice 40. How do we ensure that those federal agencies that are subject to the executive order actually do what they're supposed to do? So we have a scorecard, and we're going to be developing metrics for how these agencies advance environmental justice and how Justice 40 is implemented. And that, of course, will really be a scorecard for the Biden administration. And so, again, looking at what it means to have equity and justice in all policies, that's more than a notion. It has been decades of systemic racism that has gotten us to this point, to market-based capitalistic, fixes that did not fix the issues in our communities. And so it's not going to happen overnight that these issues get fixed, but they can begin to be addressed overnight. But it is also going to take all of our elected officials in our regions and localities understanding what's about to happen and how things may be different, preparing for that difference, and ensuring that grassroots folks are mobilized in networks or coalitions or review boards to hold those localities accountable for how that money should be coming in and dispersed in those communities. And of course, it's WHEJAC's mission to ensure that the government is putting the mechanisms in place that when that money is handed off to states or private and nonprofit companies to do work like worker training or solar installations, whatever those activities are, that handoff to those groups mandates community consultation and partnerships so that we don't just find another group of people providing aid to our communities without us being involved in how that is done and where that is done.
No, thank you for that. Those powerful words from all the panelists on that last question, and you kind of got us started on the next question. And so I want us to dig in a little bit more on Justice 40. And my question, I'm gonna rephrase this a little bit. The first part is, the main focus is making good. Justice 40's main focus is making good on President Biden's promise to deliver at least 40% of the overall benefits from federal investments in climate and clean energy to disadvantaged communities. Is focusing on benefits enough? I mean, the language seems kind of loose and it focuses on benefits, but as I like to say, and I've been saying as an outgoing member of WHEJAC, you're talking about benefits, but in chemistry class, we have inputs and outputs. What about the inputs? So the language doesn't seem strong on that. So what about the investments? And then are there existing programs that you think that should fall under this Justice 40 initiative? And so what are some of those programs, and what are some of the gaps? And so Peggy, you talked about some of the gaps as it relates to people being prepared, grassroots being prepared for it. Let's go back to the first part of the question. Is benefits enough? What about the investments? What are some of the programs out there that should fall into the Justice 40 umbrella? Let's start back up with you again on that, Peggy.
Well, it's important that we begin to define what the benefits of energy investments really are. We could look at benefits of investments as being extremely broad. We know that if we're investing in renewable energy, that if we're investing in healthier housing, and we're investing in workforce training, that those benefits are far-reaching and reach into so many different sectors. So again, how are we really going to determine benefits becomes very, very important. And then I think it's going to be important to look at investments at a number of levels. We need investment in our community-based organizations to be able to provide the kind of organizing, mobilization, and advocacy and learning. Our communities look to us since we are also on the front lines of thinking about policy. So we're going to know some of the trends before some of our neighbors are. And so it's our job to listen to them and have them drive the work, but it's also our job to let them know what we may know before others do about the trends and how we need to come together if we're going to have sustainable, healthy communities. There's so many ways that every single agency, and I'm not sure that we really need to identify key programs I'm not sure why almost all programs are not those that are benefiting these energy investments. So again, we're going to have to really watch as a WHEJAC, these so-called programs that are submitted as the ones that can enhance, and think about that full range of programs. We'll have to do some research there to ensure that all of the government policy and practice work should be a part of this. So that's one area we need to look at. Another area, and you know, philanthropy has been coming together around this Justice 40 Accelerator and focusing on, well, how did they get community groups ready to submit applications for funding to the federal government. And I think that the EPA has had some really good initiatives on that score. The CUP grants, for instance, the Community University Partnership grants they had for a couple of years that really helped communities begin to link to academic centers to get the data to really have a basis for evidence-based campaigns. But we're going to need a variety of strategic partnerships. And we're going to have some groups that need resources to be able to collaborate and develop those partnerships. We're going to have some groups that need support in terms of technical assistance to work on worker training and solar installation and more complex energy concepts and policies in their region. So again, how do we develop capacity at so many different levels for community, for good businesses, good business development? How do we really work to catalyze support for that kind of support at every level? And we've seen government do it. The National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences has been the key government agency funding worker training. We've seen the NIEHS really require community academic partnerships at major research centers around the country. So we know government can do it. And we just have to be creative and hold them accountable to doing those things. But as advocates, we also can't just be here in DC advocating. We've got to be going back home and ensuring that everyone at home knows what's happening and how we can all be part of doing our part to be part of this really great moment that we might have for investment.
You know, thank you for that. You know, multi-level, you know, at the federal level, state level, capacity building, technical assistance, a couple of things that you said. So thank you for those words, Peggy. Let's pass the mic to Ruth. What are your thoughts about Justice 40's implementation? What's needed?
Yeah. So the term benefits is very diffuse, very general, and can be a really slippery slope. And we know, I think, Angelo, that at some point, maybe I came in contact with some communities near the Port of LA that had worked on, say, a community benefit agreement because they were receiving all of this pollution, all these emissions from that whole operation. And I think maybe we need to work along those lines to have it laid out how each particular investment will create those alleged benefits. And as Peggy has said, everyone here has said, in consultation with the communities that are impacted. I think that benefits certainly at times can be indirect. I'll give you an example of Puerto Rico. We have a civil society proposal called We Want Sun, Queremos Sol. And it talks about how, as I mentioned, the communities, mostly in southern Puerto Rico, especially here in southeastern Puerto Rico, are the sacrifice zones for energy and generation, especially for San Juan in the north. So certainly, if we see San Juan generating its own renewable energy and doing energy efficiency and all kinds of other alternatives to central station fossil fire generation, that will be beneficial to our communities, because that must lead to those plants scaling down, if not shutting down completely. But the point is, I think we need to have that very clear, documented with provisions in some sort of agreement with the communities upon that consultation and active participation. And in Puerto Rico, we have this added layer, and in other environmental justice communities throughout the states too, where access to information is terribly difficult, because we do have a language barrier. We do have, we're over 1,000 miles away from the nearest point in the US. So there are all kinds of barriers that we need to overcome in order to have those real benefits that are mentioned in the Justice 40 initiative.
Thank you for that. You made an important point about access, language barriers. I think getting back to Peggy's point, capacity to apply, capacity to receive, capacity to use, capacity to evaluate, right? That whole infrastructure is important. And so is that happening as this Justice 40 discussion is ongoing? Thank you for those words, Ruth. Let me pass the mic to Jerome. Go ahead, Jerome.
Yeah, thinking about the Justice 40 initiative and really what the benefits look like, I think also we have to talk about the details of what that will entail for young Americans. Because as we grow into the climate crisis, we have to be able to understand what's happening from within our schools as well. So talking about climate education and making sure that young people that are communities at the front line often don't know that they're at the front lines. Like some people that are in Cancer Alley, a lot of times like kids are just going out to play. So then finding out that you're in a community that is at the brink of climate disaster, that can be really unknown. And after you realize it, you are thinking, well, what can I do? So I think making sure that Justice 40 is communicated well amongst school districts, whether that's high schools, colleges, or community centers, that needs to be really crucial. And also when talking about making sure that we include more young Americans in the benefits process as well. So that's what I would say more about the Justice 40 project.
Thank you for that, Jerome. Go ahead, Angelo.
So I want to just echo what both Peggy, Ruth, and Jerome mentioned, especially around the definition of benefits. And that's a discussion that we need to dive into at some point to really make sure those benefits are true benefits to communities. But I wanted to focus my comments on some of the recommendations that the WHEJAC made to the White House, specifically on Justice 40. One of them being that the Justice 40 must ensure 100% of the investments do not harm frontline communities, meaning that these investments, that the federal government is going to make, that there's 100% and 40% of those is supposed to benefit EJ communities. But 100% of those benefits we have to make sure that they're not going to projects that will harm communities, and meaning that we're not taking one step forward and two steps backwards, right? It just doesn't make any sense at all for us to invest in things like, gas pipelines, oil pipelines, further fossil fuel infrastructure for power plants or other types of dirty power generation. That's extremely important. And as another component to that, another recommendation is that the Justice 40 must include taking bold actions to sunset investments by 2030 in fossil fuels, plastics, and dangerous chemicals, and nuclear energy, and sunset requirements for 100% renewable electricity by 2030. So in other words, as part of this whole investment, we need to sunset all these dirty forms of power generation and other toxic emitting sources, because if we're working towards environmental justice, we need to just eliminate the source, right? So we can't hide behind the 40%. There's, there was a similar type of program in California, and there's some talk around, well, this is a down payment for environmental justice. But, at the end of the day, down payment is justice delayed, right? And justice delayed is justice denied. And so we need to make sure that this program is really about elimination and real investments in communities in the many ways that you all have mentioned just now.
Thank you, Angelo. Stop kicking the dang can down the road, right? I mean, that's kicking the can. Again, as I said earlier, how are you gonna talk about justice for you and a just transition to a clean energy economy, and you invest in improving gas infrastructure? Those two things don't go together, y'all. I don't understand it. So appreciate those specificity, Angelo, about do no harm. Address the problem. What we saying, y'all? We want reparations, we want restoration, we want rejuvenation. Stop the toxic trauma, stop the structural violence, stop the state-sanctioned violence against our communities, right? So thank you for that. I mean, those are important comments that y'all are all making. Now, this next question, y'all kind of hit on it already a little bit, but I want you to dig a little bit more about this accessibility issue. I made a comment earlier about capacity to apply, to receive, to use and evaluate. But what are the potential policy or other proposals that could assist in furthering equity and accessibility in these federal programs? Because y'all are saying it, racism is part of the reason that got us here, and you got a racist system that's gonna stop people being able to access the money. I mean, I'm not sure people are understanding that. So how can we ensure these federal resources are allocated in a just and equitable way to these historically invisibilized, marginalized, communities that have been left out of the opportunity structures? So let's go. I'm gonna go to Ruth first on that question.
Okay, great, thank you. So I want to just bring up a very current and relevant example that we're having with lack of accessibility to the federal government that we hope will be one of the big changes. So I think everyone knows that in 2017, we had two hurricanes, one big one, the Hurricane Maria that was a direct hit and knocked down our whole electric grid, basically the transmission and distribution lines that run from southern Puerto Rico, mostly to the north and to the San Juan metro area. So FEMA stepped in and has not been accessible. We are still today trying to gain access to the FEMA decision-making process. FEMA is about to, has allocated the third largest amount of funding in its history for the reconstruction of the electric grid in Puerto Rico, and has not been accessible to community, environmental, labor, civil society, academic groups that advise us constantly. And I think that I just wanted to make it in terms of an example. If we are doing a whole of government approach now, and environmental justice is a priority and climate justice is a priority of this administration, we cannot let FEMA disperse this third largest amount of funds to rebuild the current transmission system, to build new gas-fired plants. That is currently being considered by FEMA. We need true access to that agency, and we need the president to make sure, and the Biden-Harris administration to make sure that civil society participation is incorporated into that decision-making. That would be just a waste of federal funds. That would be rebuilding the same system, would just be part of a vicious cycle of destruction. We know, as Jerome said, we're in the midst of a climate crisis. The Caribbean, to a certain extent, Puerto Rico is, to a certain extent, I mean, there's so many ground zeros here, right, in this climate crisis. And we're going to have more frequent and more intense. The AR6 report confirmed it beyond any doubt. And we need to build something much more resilient that has to do with empowering local communities to participate in the electric system as not just passive consumers of energy, but producers, prosumers that can become energy literate. And as Peggy says, become trained in these areas. We need the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority to use these funds allocated to it to put us in the 21st century and work with communities, work with their employees, with their workforce, and not allow private companies, as so often has happened in Puerto Rico with these disasters and these federal funding, where none of those funds have really a multiplier effect in the local economy. There have been studies that document that over 90% of those funds just leave the island immediately, leave Puerto Rico immediately. So we need access to the decision-making at these federal agencies, and to be able to be part of this process in a meaningful way.
Thank you for that. So access, we're talking about FERC, we're talking about FEMA, talking about these other agencies, and you use a term I haven't heard before, prosumers, producers. You're talking about energy sovereignty. So we need to make sure that these programs are leading to some real energy sovereignty. Thank you for that. Let's go to Angelo next.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything Ruth said, for sure. One of the things about these types of programs, they're set up through a broken system. I think you kind of alluded to that, Sacoby, that the systems that they operate in were systems that were really meant to kind of keep our communities in place, right? And so we need to change the systems within these broken systems. Part of that is ensure that our communities are not at a disadvantage. So many of these different types of AstroTurf organizations or climate capitalists are positioned in a place to compete for these funds and get these funds where we're at a disadvantage of competing for these funds. And so it has to be based on a equity type of process, so that folks that are in most need of these funds, that are going to actually realize the implementation of these funds through real sustainable and healthy processes, need to be able to access these funds and be positioned properly. I think one mechanism is a criteria, a really hard line criteria that identifies the communities that these funds are allocated for, not for organizations that all of a sudden this year started to implement an environmental justice program within their organization, or that's the main focus. They see the dollar signs, right, in the administration, and they're starting to ramp up. So we need to have a hard line in terms of the criteria for who should be getting these funds. Obviously, that's a conversation and a dialogue that needs to happen about what that criteria is. But I think that criteria basically is a safeguard that says no one outside of this criteria has access to these funds, so that we can see these real investments in communities and making sure that ownership is happening in communities, to make sure that is happening. I'll just leave it there because I know everyone else has so much more to say about this.
No, thank you for that. So you're saying we need to have tight criteria that gives us tight bounds. So y'all listen to what Angelo said. There's an EJ gold rush. People see green, and now all of a sudden they do EJ, all these EJ pop-up shops, and folks that, what's EJ? Oh, was that Mike Jones song? Y'all rap song, y'all know this. Last year, you know me, now it's hot, EJ is hot, you all on me. So you got so many people that are into EJ now because they see the money. And I'm gonna say something, Angelo, that I think you were saying. The front line communities, the front line has to be at the what? Front of the line. That's what Angelo was saying. So y'all use that one. That has to be the model. The front lines at the front of the line. Go ahead, Brother Jerome.
Right, exactly. Thinking about making sure that things are accessible. A lot of times when we think about the nuances of that, we have to make sure that we not only just talk about accessibility when it comes to going to the website and figuring out how to apply, but actually making sure that it's accessible on all fronts. Like from the very beginning, people aren't even educated about what need is there. And I think that's incredibly crucial about the environmental justice screening tool of making sure we have the data to back up, hey, this is why we need communities at the front lines. This has been decades of disadvantages. So when we talk about making sure that these programs are accessible, making sure that they're transparent, because as Ruth said, whenever we have a corporation that comes in and tries to privatize what should be public utilities, then that creates a shadow, and only in those shadows corruption continues to seep into our communities. But when we have active transparency that's mandated through a criteria that Angelo just talked about, that is how we make sure that it's accessible to people. Like a lot of times it's just the facade of mystery that allows people to be like, oh, I'm not going to really touch this at all. I'm not going to really talk about, not really understand, even look to understand what needs to be done. And communities are left in the dark for decades. And that's what we're seeing now. So having a criteria about transparency that's active and that is continuing to be updated so that we don't allow private companies to be able to upcharge and continue to exclude communities, that's really what's needed to make sure that we have more accessible infrastructure and accessible investment. Also, when we're talking about a system that continues to exclude our communities, it's a lot of times swindled away from Black communities in the case of the Lower Ninth Ward in Louisiana. Like the Lower Ninth Ward in Louisiana was supposed to have federal funds that should have rebuilt that community. But the Upper Ninth Ward, a predominantly community that's not of color, got a lot of those funds in addition to the insurance that they already had and economic access they already had. So making sure that it's outlined for frontline communities, making sure that it's there and implemented, and then having a review, seeing what that implementation process wielded. Another case is in Coney Island, New York City, where we're seeing that they're supposed to have 6 feet of seawall that was allocated by federal funds, but the accessibility of it was saying, oh, only one for-profit company got that. And 9 years later, we still don't have a six feet seawall. And like, that's really what's changing, is that like, we need to make sure we're having active review and active look back and say, what is these federal funds done in the past? And how can we change and update it for 21st century in a 21st century way? Because we have all these great technologies, we have all these great improvements, let's actually use it to modernize how we give federal funds out.
Thanks for spitting that knowledge. I like all the stuff. Y'all are coming with it with this in this panel. I'm gonna give pass the mic to Peggy. What are your thoughts about this question?
Well, you know, I think we've had an opportunity to see the stimulus grants. Then we've seen this American Job Act, where there are infrastructure investments, but they're tied to the old ways of doing things. So there's a lot of false solutions in the same Jobs Act that could be providing some good infrastructure investments in our communities. So that's very tricky. You know, the American Jobs Act can provide money for jobs, but it's also going to roll back some of the key NEPA provisions that Trump had put in. And without the administration standing tough and our elected officials standing tough, we could pass an American Jobs Act and the idea of getting investment out the door with all of our allies who say, oh, environmental justice is a priority. But, you know, our allies don't really understand how the go down goes down. They don't understand that getting money out the door does not mean it gets to where it's supposed to. They're not used to that. You know, our allies are used to just saying this is the policy and writing all the implementation of regulations, and they believe it all goes just according to form. But we know it doesn't, and it never gets to us. And we know that market-based mechanisms are almost a synonym for not getting to the front line. And so how do we put some things in place so this doesn't happen? The WHEJAC has recommended that there will be an environmental justice review team in every federal agency that is subject to the executive order. We don't need that money going out anywhere until a group of environmental justice folks who understand these issues have looked at what these agencies are doing and says, yes, this is a good program to enhance, this is where things should go. We can't have money getting out of these agencies, because what's going to happen is we're going to think that this sort of interagency working group of representatives of all these federal agencies is going to be the enforcer. We cannot rely on that. We have got to ensure that the agencies are thinking the right way. And we're talking about agencies who have a middle management making daily decisions, who've never thought about these issues, probably have never heard of environmental justice. So we cannot let these agencies be off on their own. They've got to have the kind of advice that the White House is getting. And then again, as I said, a lot goes back to the federal government devolving their authority to states. And we know that's where our problem is in terms of enforcement and legacy pollution. And I'm just going to end by saying that I've said to EPA, it's great to have all these new initiatives and we're going to have all this money for air monitoring and all of that. But if legacy pollution is not addressed, no one is going to applaud. And for a legacy pollution to be addressed, we have got to address permitting at the state level and enforcement.
Thank you for that. Just some points that y'all raised. This system, this money coming down is not getting to the front line. But I think, Angela, like you said, the system is working for who it's supposed to work for, right? I mean, we said it's broken. It ain't broken for some folks, right? It's working the way it's always worked for the people it's supposed to work for, right? So how do we transform that whole system, right? And then what you're talking about, Peggy, you know, y'all think about this. You know, you have this WHEJAC, which is transformational, right? It's this moment in time. You've had one EJAC before the WHEJAC for what, almost 30 years. You're only the second EJAC. You think about that. You're only the second EJAC. So you're exactly right. We haven't had a full, real seriousness taken to look at environmental justice, because if you did, I think you would have already had more EJACs before now, right? So you're making some really powerful points about what we need to do to change. And then one last point that y'all got to, and you talk about micro-targeting. I like to use the word micro-targeted communities with most need the frontline fence line. But then how are we gonna make sure we're gonna micro-target the people gonna do the business, do the work, like Ruth said, creating a prosumer environment. That also has to be part of what we do too, right? So thank you for those comments. This next question, I'm gonna make this the last question, I think, so I want to maybe take a couple of questions from the audience. So I'm gonna go to Angelo first. So one of the recommendations WHEJAC put forth to promote opposition, I think you talked about this a little bit, Angelo, but I'll give you another chance to get on it a little bit more. Opposition to investments that extend the capacities of fossil fuel fired generation, carbon capture and storage, nuclear power, or carbon markets. As the nation looks forward to move towards a just transition away from dirty fuels, what safeguards are in place to make clean energy equitable and accessible? How will communities impacted by the transition away from these sources of energy see benefits or incentives? We talked about a little bit, but I just want to get back to this, this kind of tale of two cities in some ways. You're saying one thing, but kind of something else is happening. Go ahead, Angelo.
Yeah. So one, again, going back to this like hard deadline, we got to stop investing in fossil fuel and other toxic types of sources that our communities are suffering from. The investments, from my perspective, kind of going back to this criteria idea, that the investments have to be strictly dedicated for certain groups of folks so that we can really see the true benefit. We don't want to continue to funnel more money to Shell Oil or ExxonMobil or whoever it is, so that now they can do renewable energy, whether that's true renewable or not. They'll continue to use their systems of oppression against us, regardless of what type of energy they're producing. We need to make sure that investment goes to real folks in communities so that we can start to have true ownership across the board, whether that's home ownership, or whether that's businesses, or whether that's production of energy, production of food, the whole bit. We need to be at the table to be able to acquire those types of benefits and start to build that wealth that folks need, right? So thinking about that, making sure that investing in small co-ops, collectives, and putting that within a very hard criteria or requirement. And the other thing is that where there are investments in larger corporations, we need to make sure that there are things like community benefits in place and ensure that there's true local hire of previously incarcerated folks, of kind of folks that otherwise wouldn't be able to compete for those jobs in other places. We need to make sure that those investments are put in place in a way that our folks are really going to benefit. Again, going back to this question, or the definition of what is benefit, just by investing in it's kind of like the opportunity zones, right? That was supposed to be a benefit in our communities, but who benefited? Corporations came in and built these heinous projects, and supposedly it's like a trickle down, I guess. But we didn't see any real benefit in our communities. So we need to make sure that the folks that are taking advantage of those resources are folks in our communities, developing projects for the benefit of our communities. And I like that term. I don't know, it's kind of an old term around, visible differences in our communities. You need to be able to go out and point to something and say, this is a benefit to our community, not to point to a freeway that's widened by 4 more lanes, or dredging of a port, or a gas-powered power plant, but real, true investments. That's one thought.
Yes, thank you, sir. Thank you. Let's go to Jerome next.
Could you link to your question again?
Oh, just talking about, as we trying to transition away from, dirty fossil fuels, and we want to, and one of the recommendations, you talked about, let's not invest in carbon capture. Let's not invest in dirty fossil fuels. Let's not invest in nuclear. So the question is really about how can we move forward, with make sure that safeguards are in place to make sure all these communities, particularly the ones that we're talking about, the front line, fence line, are really getting energy equity and accessibility. How can we make sure these communities that are impacted as we do this transition away from these sources of dirty energy see benefits and they see real incentives?
Absolutely. I think that one of the major ways that we create safeguards for communities is that we don't localize power. As we continue to localize power, the more we lose accountability from communities. And I think especially when we talk about Indigenous and Black communities, well, especially Indigenous communities, they barely have access to power right now. And when we think about, well, are we going to link them to a larger system that already continues to disadvantage them? No, we need to make sure that we have active energy ownership in their own community. I think that's really important as we move forward. We don't give away that power to be able to power ourselves, but actually make sure we root ourselves in a community-led approach to energy production. Also, I think that when we talk about accessibility for going forward and investing in renewable energy, it's incredibly crucial that we make sure that it's not only just accessible on a system-wide basis, but also on a community-wide basis. Because a lot of times when we talk about, oh, what are we gonna do about this energy production and energy standpoint in apartment buildings, a lot of times tenants don't have the choices of, are we gonna use solar or wind? They're just saying, oh, we're just gonna go whatever the landlord says. So having that safeguard of making sure tenants are able to change their local energy use is a crucial point as well. I think that a great example of that is the Clean Energy DC Act of 2018, where they allowed tenants to be able to vote on which default should be for their local buildings. And I think that's a key safeguard as well, as making sure communities have the leadership and lead role in determining their energy production.
Thank you, sir. Let's go with Peggy next.
I think we're talking a bit about a just transition, and just transition isn't totally about jobs. In fact, I was at a meeting with some labor folks, and they described a just transition as a transformative economic and community development system, that we have to transform the way we do economic and community development. And so, yes, that means moving jobs from the fossil fuel economy to the renewable one. Yes, it means catalyzing new economic development, entrepreneurial opportunities for people of color in their own communities. Yes, it does mean having community level energy grids so that we don't have to worry that the first community that gets turned off when there's a power issue is the community of color as usual. So, how are we energy secure? We already realized that 30 million households in this country are energy insecure right now, before COVID, could not pay the energy bill as well as the rest of their family bills. And now we know under COVID, we're experiencing perhaps amazing levels of shutoffs, evictions, because people have had their jobs interrupted because of the pandemic. So we really need to think about what a just transition really is. It is about investment in our communities. It's about worker training, and it's about jobs. And all jobs are not going to be good union jobs. We have many areas of this country where there is no union structure. For instance, in the South. In large urban cities, we have unions where people of color who are the most underemployed can't get into the union, can't get into an apprentice or a pre-apprenticeship program. So how are we going to think about new models of worker associations that where there might not be a union association, but how do workers come together in a worker cooperative and share those benefits, share the benefits of their collective work? So we really have an opportunity to rethink so much of how our economy grows and where it grows. And to do that, we're really going to have to come together with allies, thought leaders, academics, to really begin to not rush to judgment on the newest policy that's pending in Congress, but to really put some thought into the next year of what we really need and how we can really begin to achieve some of that. And we're going to need people who do know how government works, really. We're going to need people who really know how appropriations get out of agencies. And we're going to have to work with them to really, really begin to understand and think about new mechanisms, again, for investment. We've heard a lot about green banks. We've heard about local green banks. The current green bank situation, again, does not address the issues in our community. But how might we think about funding beyond Justice 40, funding local, local vehicles that can be an investment engine for the years to come as well.
Thank you for those words. I'm glad this session is being recorded because, Peggy, you said a whole lot. I was trying to go through it in my head and digest it. But transformative economy, right? You talked about we need new worker associations because everybody doesn't have a labor union, right? Everybody doesn't have access to that ability to connect. And also sometimes, I'm gonna say it this way: hide last and fight first. My pops is a pipe fitter. That's my family's experience. So we got to figure out ways to have equity and justice in all phases of this new transformative economy. So thank you for calling out those opportunities there and the challenge for us in this space. Go ahead, Ruth.
Yeah, so I'm glad we're using the term transformation, and I love Peggy's definition. It's this transition, just transition, is much more than jobs, right? It's the transformation of economic and social relationships, and that's precisely what our civil society proposal here is in Puerto Rico. We need a radical transformation of our electric system, and for our public utility to step up to the demands of the times. Let's say it's a lot. It's as Professor Catalina Dionis would say, there are 4 basic tenets here in terms of that transformation. We need energy, not only decarbonization, but also decentralization. Super important, because what we're seeing right now is that FEMA is saying, well, if the government of Puerto Rico wants to rebuild that centralized transmission system and use $8-9 billion to do it, we have to fund it and continue with a centralized system. We need to decentralize it, because when one part of the grid goes down, we're all out without power. In the 30 years that I can remember of hurricanes passing through Puerto Rico, we've had partial or complete outages 4 months. People just know about Hurricane Maria, but we've been living this for decades. And so this second tenet is democratization, right? That transformation, especially the electric grid or system, and which has implications, as Peggy said, as social, economic, all kinds of implications. Democratization means that communities are part of that generation, that that the technology allows for now, right? So communities can generate energy to a large extent, or participate much more actively and not be passive about this. And lastly, not least, the decolonization of our electric system. We in Puerto Rico, we do not have gas, we do not have oil, we do not have coal. It's all imported, and billions of dollars go out of, leave our economy every year to purchase those fossil fuels. So the LNG industry, the gas industry, the methane gas, especially fracked gas industry, has been applying the greatest pressure I've ever seen to dump all of this, especially fracked gas, into the Caribbean, and even violate the Jones Act to bring it into Puerto Rico. And we need to stop that colonial relationship. FEMA is considering funding a new gas-fired plant in the San Juan area. That may look and sound generous, like FEMA would pay hundreds of millions of dollars to build this plant, but that would just make us continue to have us addicted to the methane gas, the so-called natural gas. So we definitely need a transformation in so many aspects of this energy generation issue that goes well beyond the decarbonization, goes well beyond not burning fossil fuels. It has to do with other aspects as well. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to take we have about 6 more minutes. We'll take a question from the audience. And it's sort of similar to the question that the last question I had listed, but I wanted to open up to the audience. What are some changes that need to be made in screening, screening criteria, or criteria? How do we define the EJ community, or how do we define the frontline community to make sure that those folks are getting government funding? So what are the screening criteria that should be used? And I'm gonna go to Jerome first.
Yeah, so when we think about an environmental justice screening tool, we've been working with the USDS on implementing a application that does this specifically, is making sure that when we define frontline communities, we make sure that we are talking about a plethora of different natural disaster implementations. Also, when it comes to infrastructure, lacking in infrastructure, and a plethora of other major key points that we have to hit whenever we talk about a frontline community. Also, when we talk about an environmental justice screening tool, we have to make sure that it is not just working for agencies that are trying to identify this, but also local municipalities. And that's when that comes where the two services of the environmental justice screening tool is making sure that it's accessible for local governments, making that that process more transparent, and also federal agencies to talk about the need that is for frontline communities. So when identifying communities, we must also make sure that they also have a strong relationship with local municipalities so that they are more aware of what's happening when they request funding from the local government. So there's so much that's great with the environmental screening tool. And I think also in tandem with that, we have to work with local communities to make sure that it is more known to them what front lines are there within their own local spaces.
Thank you, sir. Let me go to Angelo next.
Thank you. I guess a point I'd like to make is that, that there's a lot of data points that folks are trying to kind of work around. The big issue is that to have a common data point across the whole country is a huge challenge. And so thinking about making sure to incorporate qualitative data alongside the quantitative data is really important. The difference between rural and urban communities are like stark. And so identifying a EJ community in a rural environment versus a urban environment is really difficult. And I think that's where the qualitative data comes in and can be helpful. We've seen this experience in California with CalEnviroScreen, and there's just like stark differences. But when you go to the community, you can go to a neighborhood in Tulare and you're like, wow, this is as bad, if not bad, as the highest scoring, urban environments, but it doesn't show on the map, right, or on the screening tool. So the qualitative and storytelling data is really important to include as well.
Thank you for that, Angelo. Let's go to Ruth, please.
Thank you. So I was so impressed with the working group that worked on, that prepared the list of screening criteria, how they went through and took such a close look at which of our communities are so overburdened and so underserved, and really zeroed in on those criteria. And so I would say we have a document, we should aspire, right, to have that implemented. Also, I wanted to say, there was something I wanted to mention as to a previous question. I wonder if it's okay to address it here. There's something about what mechanisms exist, what provisions say in law now exist that are worth continuing and need improvement, but provide an important tool. I think certainly in our case in Puerto Rico, and I think in many environmental justice communities, we need the local emergency planning committees to be effective, to be accessible, to incorporate real community participation, access to information, and decision making in those committees. We've seen so many times where communities are not even aware, somebody said this earlier, not even aware that of the dangers that surround them and what can happen with this climate crisis, right? So we were comparing notes at a previous meeting with California. What could California and Puerto Rico have in common? Well, their transmission system is sometimes exacerbating or even igniting fires, right? Our transmission system is hit by hurricanes. We need to find different ways to move and generate energy so that we become, as someone said, energy sovereignty, I think. And that's definitely an issue. You know that in Puerto Rico, we are an unincorporated territory. We have no say, basically. We have no voting representation in Congress. We can't vote for the president. We need, especially at this time, our stateside collaborators and people in the states generally to especially intervene as to FEMA's allocation of funds to rebuild the business as usual 20th century grid that we have, as opposed to listening to civil society proposals and doing the kind of renewable energy generation cited right on close to or at the point of use with other programs. Thank you.
Thank you for that. You made a powerful point about saying unincorporated. I always say when you're unincorporated, when it comes to environmental justice, it's contamination without representation. Right. So you have that Puerto Rico, DC, a lot of historic communities in the South where, descendants of enslaved Africans are colonials, are migrant camps. Some of the brothers and sisters, there's brothers and sisters on reservations. You have places all across the country where folks have been dumped on, right? And then they're not getting the infrastructure. So you're dumped on, but don't get the infrastructure. So thank you for really calling that out. And I also just want to say for the WHEJAC members, these conversations are really, really, I just heard this in NEJAC. I'm looking forward to seeing NEJAC and WHEJAC work together because they talked about we need to have a climate working group. We need to have an energy working group. We need to have a Gulf Coast working group. I think someone talked about we need to have a Caribbean. They talked about we need to have a Caribbean working group. So what y'all are saying in this session are things that NEJAC, when I just meeting we just had a few days ago, some of the same comments, and then about Justice 40, about the funding, about the new economy. So I look forward to seeing WHEJAC and NEJAC work together, with Richard and others who, Richard being a connector between the two, and also Karen Martin being a connector between the two. So just wanted to say that. I'm gonna give the last word to Peggy, and I'm gonna close this show out. Go ahead, Peggy.
Well, I'm just going to ask everybody on this call to go on the EPA website and look at the recommendations. We've just been talking about the screening tool and how to define environmental justice. We have done that, and we have developed, I don't know the number of metrics, but it looked like 50 or 60 from health and climate, looking at facilities, looking at toxins, looking at water quality, looking at air quality, looking at lack of sanitation and infrastructure. So I think for those of you who are really interested in this, go look at those recommendations, and you'll never ask after that, what is environmental justice? What do environmental justice groups do every day? This is what we're working on. We're working on transformation to healthy, sustainable communities. And that's going to require addressing the legacy pollution, and it's going to require addressing climate change and extreme weather events, and how we invest in the infrastructure to ensure that we can be sustainable, innovative, and creative and transformative. So thank you, Sacoby, for this really incredible conference of ideas and voices and perspectives. Thank you so much.
No, thank you for blessing us, all the WHEJAC members, and spending time with us on Saturday. Thank you, Jerome. Thank you, Ruth. Love to hear about the work in Puerto Rico, and want to make sure we always, as my colleague April Baptiste, who is from Trinidad and Tobago, she said at the NEJAC meeting, we need to make sure we talk about Caribbean, we need to talk about Puerto Rico, we need to talk about U.S. Virgin Islands, we need to have more connections. So I want to make sure I give a love to you and also to my Caribbean brothers and sisters who have been talking about these issues, and then we uplift those issues. And thank you, Angelo, again, for all your work with moving forward now, your work on WHEJAC, and of course, all your work with my community partner, Savannah, folks down in Omar Muhammad, and then and people in the Northeast as well with the Southport folks and Kim Gaddy. And of course, thank you, Peggy, mentor Peggy, for being here and being, I think I'm gonna add a word. So EJ Sage, EJ Elder, EJ Icon, EJ Johnny, EJ Legend. I think Ruth said legend. So I want to add, I think that's five words. So appreciate all of you today. Love what you said. And thank you for your commitment to environmental justice and really building that groundbreaking, transformative WHEJAC. And so just, thank you for your service and thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
you're welcome.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
So Yan, are we using the same room or moving to a different room for the closeout?
Nope, it's this room.
Okay, cool. So I just want to say again, thank you to our WHEJAC panelists again. Thank you for everyone who participated today in day 3 of this symposium. And thank you for those who gave us grace and patience with the tech issues, man. This Zoom life, y'all, it's been interesting, but I'm hopefully it was smoother today. And so I just want to wrap us up. I want to thank all our sponsors who were able again to make this event possible and making sure that we were able to, do the work we need to do in creating a space, as Peggy just said, a space for folks to come together and talk about really important issues. And then also this peer learning, right? So we got folks from across the country. We got folks who are doing work in the islands in Puerto Rico. We got people from around the world who have been participating in this session. So EJ is just not a US thing, it's a global thing, right? And so how, and just to the last panel, I want to show appreciation again, how we put the economy, right? Some part of me saying, how you put the economy, we talk about transformative, how you put the economy back into the hands of the people. So I wanted to just give y'all that last note, but thank you to the sponsors again, Environmental Defense Fund, Maryland Conservation Voters, Chispa Maryland Earthjustice, Sarah Club, Maryland Sarah Club, Young Concerned Scientists, some of the green groups who are trying to, do better and be better. So we appreciate you. Chesapeake Bay Trust, Baja Chair at University of Maryland, Choose Clean Water Coalition, one of our co-chairs of the EJ State Table for Maryland, and we have this regional our regional EJ coalition that we want to bring out, and hopefully we have people participating from Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, and DC in that coalition. I think the tentative name for right now, placeholder name, is the Mid-Atlantic Alliance for Environmental Economic Mid-Atlantic I'm messing it up. Y'all laughing at me, those you know what I'm about to say. Mid-Atlantic Alliance for, I'm messing up. It's supposed to be MAGIC. I can't come with the acronym right. Environmental Economic Justice Coalition. So MAGIC, I'll figure it out, but let me keep moving. So thank you to the Center for Health and Environment and Justice, NAMITE, our colleagues with the coalition, and NAMITE has been doing a lot of work, global EJ work. Thank you, Johns Hopkins. Thank you, Rachel Carson Council. Thank you, Social Responsible Agriculture Project. And thank you to School of Public Health. Really want to thank the EPA in the support of this symposium. So Administrator Regan providing words via video to support this symposium, which is the seventh symposium. Really want to give a lot of thanks and love to Dr. Cecilia Martinez, who was our 10th CEEJH lecture, really talking about her work with CEQ and just the level of expertise that she brings to the table at that level, all the years of experience as a community organizer. Many of us know Cecilia well, and just really appreciate her leadership and also just the bringing EJ to CEQ and then doing the work in the Biden administration to make sure that they're being held accountable to these initiatives around racial justice, environmental justice, and Justice 40. I mean, there were a lot of panels that I think, all of them were awesome. And so there's so many panels that were I mean, I was awestruck by the level of energy and expertise and passion that folks have for these issues. So the Jedi panel, right? Patrice, Leslie, Christy, Andre, and Adrian. Jones the Color Network that I moderated. That was deep. Danielle Collette, I remember Collette said something about just a whole change in the funding ecosystem. And Elizabeth's work. Peak Plastic, the videos from Steve and Megan and Miss Barbara, Miss Gail, Miss Myrtle, Miss Mary, talking about experiences in Cancer Alley and fighting back against the petrochemical industry. And having these new alliances, new approaches, trying to affect change in Louisiana. I was really, as a kid in the candy store, looking up at my elders, legends, sages, icons, Vernice, Peggy, Charles, and Tom, and learning about the 1991 First People of Color Summit and the work that went into that and the 70 Principles of Environmental Justice and how, we stand on the shoulders of those giants and how they create the pathways for us to do the work that we do today. And then again, thanking my WHEJAC panelists, Ruth, Jerome, Angelo, and Peggy again, just putting in the work, right? And then, like I think Peggy said, or someone said, y'all been working every night on recommendations, working on the weekends. That's community, right? That's activism. That's advocates. They put in the work, right? Community speak with their own voice, and you got community speak with their own voice as part of WHEJAC. And I want to thank all of our amazing panelists from communities, government agencies, advocacy groups, and academic institutions. And I really also want to thank the team who helped organize this. This is very much is an effort of students, our staff. So the folks who planned it, Salim, Beverly, Rachel, Priya, Asia, Faith, staff like Joe, Rami, Studi, Yan, Michael, like I said, Yan's the man. Our outside moderators, Vivek, Steve, Elise, Rebecca, Fred Tupman, Rabia, Megan, and then all the folks who helped out, did that yeoman's work. Denise, Paige, Corinna, Kania, Vivek, Ravi Shadran, new PhD student in the center, Anushi, Michaela, Emily, Zaref, Rose, Ariel, Supraja, Carly, and Barry. And then our most valuable participant during these last 3 days, Debbie C. And I also want to thank the audience, those of you who were able to attend and participate and learn at this 7th UMD EJ Symposium, all the practitioners out there, all the advocates, all the government folks. I mean, hopefully you will be able to take pieces of symposium with you, right? Back to communities, back to your offices, back to your schools, right? You talked about DEI. Change the culture of your organizations, right? Change the culture of your government agency. Change the culture of your academic institution. Build bridges with your peers, community groups. That's the space that we created. These recordings will be available for you. This Hoover conversation, this resource will be available for you to continue these conversations. We have a moment right now in this country to do a lot. We have a moment in this country that EJ is being focused on. We have to take advantage of the moment. We have to make sure that we're doing work to address these sacrifice zones, address these riskscapes. We have to make sure we address racial capitalism. We have to make sure we address, as Richard Moore didn't say here, but at the NEJAC meeting, environmental genocide. As Tom Goldtooth talked about environmental genocide, ecocide. We got to address environmental slavery. We got to address environmental racism, y'all. Let's learn from this symposium. Let's move forward together. EJ is about family, y'all. EJ is about our shared humanity. EJ is about love. EJ is about solidarity. EJ is about hope. EJ is a dream. EJ is a vision. EJ is a goal. EJ is a movement. Let's go out there, move, take the momentum, and do work. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for being here. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday, and I'm going to get some sleep now. See y'all later.
Thanks. Before we go, though,
Go ahead, Yan.
one last thing. So a quick change to the program that we had to make, an unfortunate change. We will not be doing the speed networking tables this evening. So this is the close, the end of the program. Keep an eye on your email for a feedback survey. For in the next few days, you'll get a request to take a survey. Let us know what you liked, what you didn't like, and how we can improve for next year, including topics that you would like to see at next year's symposium. And also, the Whova platform will be open and available for the next 3 months using the web app. And if you have the mobile app, it'll be available for the next 6 months. So make sure you take all the conversations that have been going on over there. You solidify some of those connections, folks that you saw in the sessions. You can reach out to them through Whova, through direct message. You can even do, I checked it out, you can even do like calls through the Whova app. So please make the most of it. And before we go, I just want to do this one last time. Thank you, everyone, for your support. For, of course, Dr. Wilson went across the list, and we had a whole lot of just amazing people, including participants, panelists, moderators. So thank you all from me. I've got one more thing to throw us out there, and that's just this joyous cheer.
Hey, Yan, people are telling you to speak up. Your voice is too low. I know you're tired. Speak up. Project.
Oh, okay. Well, that's all I have to say. So thank you so much. Fortunately, the live transcription is working. Excellent. Thank you, Debbie C, for everything. All right. Now we can go. Take care, everyone.
Take care. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Love the EJ family.